Good afternoon. My name is Jody Burnett. It's my privilege to serve as the current chair of the Utah State University Board of Trustees. In that capacity, I'm pleased to welcome here today on behalf of President Noel Cockett and our entire Aggie Nation to Research Landscapes, our collaborative effort to provide informed context, connections, conversations on land, water, and air issues here in the state of Utah. We especially want to thank our number of legislators and county, state, and local leaders who have joined us here today. Please join me also in expressing our collective appreciation to Dave Peterson and O.C. Tanner for allowing us to use this beautiful space. Out of the three areas that we're covering in our Research Landscape series this year, land is probably the most challenging, and I have personal knowledge of how contentious that could be in another life representing local governments in land use and zoning matters. We know and appreciate there are a lot of strong feelings and opinions when it comes to deciding how to use this precious resource and in the best manner as here in our state. As the state's land grant institution, of course, we feel a strong connection and obligation to address these issues. It is our unique role to study, understand, and communicate the results and solutions that we find. As you RSVP'd for this event, we ask you to provide some feedback to us on a few questions, and I'd like to share just a few of those results with you before we turn the time over to our speaker. So as I mentioned earlier, the RSVPs indicate that we have a broad variety of state, county, and city government, business, and other community interests represented in our attendance. About 3/4 of you think that land use is one of the top three most important issues facing Utah today. Not surprisingly so for those of you that deal with this issue. Your top three most pressing issues are all closely related: urban growth, public lands, and the interaction between natural and urban ecosystems. But your next choices, maintaining land for agricultural purposes and outdoor recreation, show the other competing needs and interests in the uses of our land are also important to you and to all of us. We hope today that we can help shed a little light on these issues and potential solutions by sharing what we know, what we've measured, and how that impacts your potential decision-making processes. Our featured researcher today is Courtney Flint. She will share her work on land and well-being while also covering issues that some of her colleagues are engaging in to address land use issues in the state and other areas. As you've seen through our display of research projects on the back tables during our opening reception, USU research addresses a much wider range of issues than we're able to cover in a short time allotted for this presentation. I hope you'll review some of those other projects as well, and then maybe the subject of future presentations. Our discussion today will begin with a few opening remarks from Jenny Wilson, who will discuss the complicated land use dynamics that she's facing in county government, specifically here in Salt Lake County. As all of you, I'm sure, are aware, Jenny is the current mayor of Salt Lake County, and in that capacity, she now serves more than 1 million constituents. I believe since 2005, is that right, Jenny? She was a member of the county council, and in that capacity, championed numerous public policy initiatives in dealing with some of these issues, including open space preservation, and was instrumental in helping establish the Jordan River Commission, which is designed to improve and preserve that beautiful resource for all of us to use in the future. Next, we'll hear a few remarks from Cameron Diehl and his perspective on land use challenges facing municipal governments here in the state of Utah. Since 2017, Cameron has served as the executive director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Cameron has been at the ULCT in one capacity or another since graduating from law school from the University of Colorado School of Law, including everything from a legislative intern to a policy analyst, attorney, and director of government relations. So we appreciate both Jenny and Cameron joining us today. And then finally, Courtney Flint will make her presentation. Courtney is on the board of scientific counselors of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She is a professor of sociology at USU and also serves as the director of the Institute for Social Science Research on Natural Resources at USU. As a natural resource sociologist, Courtney focuses on the social dynamics of environmental issues. She studies people's perspectives and actions in changing the landscapes and social and natural resource conditions, particularly focusing on community and regional levels of analysis. Currently, her research team is focusing on measuring human well-being across cities, counties, towns, and landscapes, and water resource management in mountain urban systems. Her latest work is focused on Utah, but she's also examined community well-being in areas as diverse as Alaska, Illinois, South Africa, and Austria. So to begin our conversation, please welcome me and joining to the podium, Major Jen Wilson.
Well, thank you. I'm about 8-9 months in this new role, and I'll tell you, I am lucky to be invited to a lot of seminars, discussions, and events in the community. And additionally, we have a lot of work to do internally in Salt Lake County. So when this invitation passed my desk, I'll tell you what really intrigued me and got me excited about participating was the alliance and the cooperative opportunity with USU. USU's extension program is very embedded in our mission in Salt Lake County. And as I am lucky to tour each division of Salt Lake County and hear what they're doing, it's always great, but the time that I spent with our USU extension folks, I was sort of blown away. I mean, I was a council member for 10 years, and I had no idea some of the really great things that are happening within the footprint of Salt Lake County driven by USU extension. So that's really why I'm here. I am so excited about the collaborative opportunities throughout the state. I visited USU campus as a federal candidate and sat down with president and others and toured. What a lovely institution, great leadership. And though I'm out here in a federal role now, I've had a serendipitous turn to work across the street as mayor of Salt Lake County. I'm equally as excited to partner with USU. Also, I'm lucky enough to look out the window on occasion at this beautiful building, know its significance to our community, OC Tanner, and I want to thank OC Tanner for hosting. And everyone else who participated came to attend. I see elected officials, former leadership in our legislative body, and others here today. So thank you to partners and other members of the community who are here. I'll tell you this, I think, as I go out to conferences and engage throughout the nation in my role as county mayor, I am so happy to share how deeply committed we are to recreation in our state, to our land. So we're here to talk about land use, but what it really means to me is the land as it connects to our quality of life. And while I am laser-like focused on Salt Lake County right now, I recognize our state's love of recreation and our land and our resources. And I think we're not isolated one county to the next. So I see partners from other counties and communities here, and USU's core campus being north of here, and know that we're all in this together. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about some unique demands here in Salt Lake County, but I think some of the things I touch on will relate to other counties and some areas more than others, but certainly some, as a capital city here and a county that is a large employer and the largest county in the state, what happens here I think matters to the entire state. So with that, I want to point out that population growth is nothing new. No matter where we are in our continuum, we talk about our population growth, and we've adjusted over the years in many ways as a community to our population growth. But now we're seeing in this county so little developable land, and much of the West Bench that still is ripe for development at some point is owned by one property owner, Rio Tinto, and their plans as it relates to mining operations versus land development really will impact a lot of those decisions for development, and we are feeling the pressure given right now. The company is still primarily a mining company and still holding onto a lot of land for that purpose, or land that might need reclamation. And due to that, we are seeing a different footprint for this moment in time. It's a more narrow footprint on where and how we can develop. And we know that growth, as I mentioned, will continue. By 2065, we will add an estimated 600,000 residents. So we think about 2020, we have conversations in the community about growth means, but to even forward think to that impact is daunting, right? And For me, it means that we will have to continue to focus on canyon protection, air quality, and really holding on to that quality of life that we enjoy in this county. And I'll tell you, I really think we're at this tipping point in this moment in time, and that leadership is so critical to our policy decisions and to where we will go. So as we look at challenges like the port, as we look at challenges like where and how do we deal with the mess at the mouth of the canyon when we want to get up there in the summer to hike or get up there to ski or recreate in the winter, we know that we have work to do to preserve the quality of life at this important moment in time. We also know that housing prices are creating not just challenges for young people or anyone with affordability paying the mortgage, but also that limited land is making it very difficult to develop in a way that may make sense long term. It's very costly right now. So one little item I want to share with you that I was fascinated to receive a briefing on when I entered in my new role was we put in Salt Lake County a fair amount of resources and time to evaluate and then publish what's called the overview report. And that report evaluated the existing conditions on the West Bench that I mentioned, that area west of Vineyard Highway. And I want to share a few highlights from that study. So 82% of the residents in western Salt Lake County have a daily migration to work leaving their local area. Well, that number's too high. What does that tell you? We need job centers in some of that area on the West Bench. We know that traffic congestion is one of the biggest concerns for residents in that section of the valley. And I'll tell you, it's not just on the West Bench. It's my neighbors and those who live surrounding the University of Utah trying to exit out around 4:30, 5 p.m. That's not an easy endeavor. It's not easy to live in Kearns and need to exit off of 15 or another north-south freeway or other roadway to go east to west. That's not going to be a quick commute. We have challenges, as have been quite public, related to needs for transportation and development in the southwest quadrant in that section. So we know that a lot of our land planning is related to transportation and transportation solutions, and that's very much on the forefront of our planning and within my office in Salt Lake County. We're looking for environmental responsibility. And, it's no doubt or no surprise to anyone in the room that I'm proud of my party. I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my entire life, and I'll tell you, I'm proud of the Democratic Party for stepping up 15 to 20 years ago in this community and saying, hey, we're going to move on air quality. So kudos to Patrice Aaron, who at times couldn't move a bill. Thanks to the Republicans who got it and stood out. And I'm not going to make this a partisan speech, but I do think that we have to lead, and we have to lead across the aisle and find solutions together. And I am proud that planning and development and a lot of the more maybe more aggressive action that many of us feel needs to happen has been pushed by many good leaders within our various local governments as well as our state. With that, I look forward to continuing to find net zero opportunities, coordinate with Rocky Mountain Power, find ways where we can run our buildings more efficiently. We build LEED standard buildings in Salt Lake County, but we do have older buildings that we can find ways to upgrade and operate differently, and that's a priority. I have hired an environmental leader in Salt Lake County, and we've created an environmental office that will grow and develop during my tenure as mayor. I think it's absolutely critical in this day and age. I'm going to just close for a second, just taking a second to talk about how important our Wasatch Canyons are and why my involvement in the Wasatch Canyons will be a priority, I think, for the duration of my time in office. I grew up as a hiker. a little bit of a rock climber. My dad would take me up, and I'm sure sometimes desert me because I have memories of my childhood of going, where's my father? And of course they'd pop up a few minutes later, but we were a family that really engaged in all of the wonders that our Wasatch Range provides for us. Hiking, climbing, skiing. My super athlete father, Ted Wilson, many of you know, who's now 81 and still a great athlete, but he taught me to ski no ski lessons. Between his legs at 3 years old, and one time I got stuck on a lift and came to the top of the lift, and there was Dad waiting, but that was quite a journey on my own. But I share these because I think my story is similar to the stories that each of you can tell. And if you've loved really any canyon or waterway, river, lake in this state, right? For me, the backyard was our Wasatch Canyons. Well, I'll tell you now, it's not as simple as it once was. And we have to fight, not just to support our ski resorts that I do, and I've held meetings, including yesterday with owner of a ski resort, to talk about our priorities. What is it that we want for our canyons? I remember living on the East Coast at one point in my career, going out and hiking, and I'm like, hello, Charles. Hello, Peter. Hello. Like, you made friends on the trail, but that's not the hiking that I knew. Well, I'm making a lot of friends now when I go out, right? It's more crowded. It's harder to access. We're parking in dangerous places in our canyon road. And I think that we will fail as a community if we don't get that right. And just like air quality, there's no easy answer. If anyone tells you there's an easy answer on air quality, I would challenge that. There is no easy answer on the canyon, but those two areas remain a priority for mine as we move forward. The canyon itself, we have to continue to hand off for multiple generations the precious resource that is. And that means, yes, making sure that our resorts continue to thrive, that people can get on Delta Airlines, land in the morning, get up there on the ski run, midday at the latest, enjoy that and go back about, brag about us. But we also need to make sure that, a child from the west side of Salt Lake County has access to those lands. They're affordable, whether it's winter, summer, it's there for them in the same way that the canyons, our waterways, have influenced all of our lives. So those are the values I bring to the office. I'm working hard. I hope that I have the opportunity to engage with each of you in the journey ahead. I see Carl Fisher here, who's engaged on the canyon. I want to thank him and Save Our Canyons for their work. I see other partners in the community. I see elected officials here who know what I'm talking about and believe in it, and I want to thank you for your efforts. So with that, I always love hearing from Cameron, and I look forward to the panel and the discussion as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Cameron Diehl, the Director of the League of Cities and Towns. We represent all 248 cities and towns in the state. That's 1,380 mayors and council members who are elected by their constituents to make a difference in their communities. There's one fundamental question that I want to ask today that I want you to keep in your mind as we get to the presentation in a moment, and that is, why do cities exist? Well, cities exist so that residents can have a voice in the future of their community. Cities exist per the Constitution and per state law to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of their communities, and also to plan the land use and find the balance between the needs of today's residents and tomorrow's residents. Essentially, cities are in the quality of life business, and that's why this partnership between the League of Cities and Towns and Utah State University is so essential, because ultimately the policymakers that I represent need good, unbiased information to help them make decisions that impact not just the residents of today, but the residents of tomorrow. So what does that actually mean? Well, right now you have policymakers that are making decisions about where neighborhoods should be, about the integration between where housing development should be and where transportation infrastructure should be. They're making decisions about parks and trails and open space and how all of that is interconnected. Why? It's all under that same umbrella of quality of life. And the quality of life is going to be a little bit different if you live in Cache Valley as a mothership and the flagship of Utah State University, or if you live in Blanding for one of the distance education facilities, or anywhere in between. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to how we provide quality of life to residents. In in fact, one size fits all, but the data and the information you're going to hear today and really throughout this series will help inform those policymakers to make smart decisions. Because ultimately, the question now we have to ask is, what does all of this actually mean in light of population growth? You heard Mayor Wilson talk about the challenges right here in Salt Lake County. I grew up in Murray, and I went to a youth event when I was a teenager on the west side of Harriman at a ranch. And it took forever to get there. It felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. Well, if I were to drive to that ranch today, fast forward to 2019, it still takes forever to get there. But it takes forever to get there because of the traffic, am I right? Chuck, when you're in the campus from Harriman. And unfortunately, those are the challenges that we're faced with today, and that's where Utah State can be a tremendous partner. One other key tidbit for you to know is, what do our residents think about population growth? We commissioned a study last year through Y2 Analytics that showed that 63% of Utahns feel like we're growing too quickly. Let that set in for a second. 63% feel like the success we're experiencing as a state actually is a bad thing because we're growing too quickly. And part of that, as we dug deeper in the survey, was that people felt like there wasn't a plan in place. Well, the good news is, and we do have plans in place. We have the Unified Plan for Transportation. We have SB 34 that the legislature passed. We have UDOT hiring planners all over the state. And we have Utah State University who's providing this sort of research data that's going to be critical, because even as Utah's population doubles, our available land is not going to double. And it's going to be critical for policymakers to have this information so they can make wise generational policy decisions. So with that, I look forward to hearing from you today, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
It's great to see all of you here today. Thanks for being here. You might be wondering what a sociologist is doing talking about land. But consider this view. What do you see? A farmer might see the potential for a rich alfalfa crop. An ATVer might see a place to try out the new family rig. A real estate developer might see the potential for a subdivision full of new homes, or maybe an apartment complex. A tribal member might see generations of change at odds with traditional knowledge about how their people live with the land. A lot of what I do as a sociologist is think about how people make sense of their landscapes. What's their understanding scope? Our individual lenses are shaped by our culture, our experiences, our position in society. As a sociologist who studies land and natural resource issues, I'm interested in these different vantage points. How they interact, how they conflict, and how they shape the land over time. How does the land influence people's well-being? Defined as everything that goes into making a good life. The point of this presentation today is that people live on the land. Some literally live off the land more than others. Actions people take change and impact the land. And in turn, these land changes affect our lives as well. So for me, land issues are people issues. Here along the Wasatch Front, there are more and more of us on the land, and as a result, there's no shortage of conflict. How people relate to the land makes a big difference in how we interpret changes in the land and how we plan for the future. We can zoom out to see the bigger picture of landscapes and land issues. This may mean looking at regional or statewide or even larger scales and trends. And we can also zoom in to see specific issues in specific places and how they vary. We can then see more details on the experience of land use change in a given place and how tensions can rise mightily over what happens in one seemingly small parcel of land. The inland port of Salt Lake City is a good example of this. We can toggle between the local view and the wider view to better understand how land-related issues connect us to a wider world. Going to a really wide-angle view, I just returned from working with colleagues in Austria. It's landlocked, like Utah. They're also seeing inland port-like development linked to nearby maritime ports like Trieste, Italy. And Trieste and Austria are linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative that's expanding Chinese trade routes around the world, including Utah. USU's global engagement helps us situate Utah's issues in a wider world context, and we can be a conduit for ideas. Europe's working on ideas related to sustainable transitions. When development outcomes are essentially a given, how do we get there in a way that maintains our overall well-being and quality of life? And there may be things we can learn from this global exchange of ideas. Utah is a mosaic of different landscapes. I'll explore some of these different landscape pieces and how they fit together in a complex puzzle that is tied to the well-being of the people of Utah. Looking at this map of land covered in the Intermountain West, you can see that Utah shares some landscape features with our neighboring states. Utah shares mountains and forests with our neighbors Colorado, Wyoming, and Idaho. We share their beauty as well as their fire risk. Utah shares rangelands with Wyoming and Nevada. We share the agricultural value and tensions between grazing and other rights. Utah shares red rock and canyon country with Arizona and New Mexico. Its economic boost and challenging growth from tourism. Utah doesn't have the large swaths of land, farmland that we see in Idaho north of us, but we do have farmland that's still important to many people and to our economy, and it also reflects the historic ties that we have with the land. It's the Wasatch Front's urban footprint, the red areas on this map, that dominate one of Utah's key roles in the Intermountain West. The Wasatch Front joins Colorado's Front Range, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, is a major urban landscape of the Intermountain West, each with over 2 million people. And with that growth comes economic opportunity and traffic. Landscapes have a profound influence on well-being for the people of Utah. In the Utah Wellbeing Project that my students and I launched over the last year, we've conducted public surveys in 16 cities so far. We asked over 1,600 people how different landscape features influence their well-being. Looking at Utahns together, we see the overwhelming positive influence of landscape features like mountains, rivers, lakes, city parks, red rocks, and farmland. You can see this in these blue-colored parks. Urban development and industry are positive for some, but negative or neither positive or negative for others. This varies, however, when we begin to compare perceptions of landscapes and well-being across different cities. This graph highlights the cities with high and low values for each landscape feature. Clearly, everyone likes mountains and rivers and lakes. We see little difference across communities here. Strong empirical evidence for Utah's oft-cited recreation-based way of life. Park City, which has no red rock locally at all, stands out the highest on appreciating the positive aspects of this landscape feature. Others are a little more predictable. Farmland is valued most by Laverton residents, who likely feel their farming roots, and least here in Salt Lake City, but that's still in the positive range. Urban development is interesting. It's the most highly positive in Hurricane and fast-growing Washington County, but least positive in Draper, a fully urban setting. If you live along the Wasatch Front, as many of you in this room do, you're experiencing growth. Greater access to jobs, high-speed internet, the newest Zupas, but you may also be experiencing air quality issues, overcrowded schools, competition over access to natural resources, and a lack of affordable housing. And you have this tremendous mountain backdrop and playground. Well, I was born in Montana, and I grew up there and in Arizona, and I moved to Utah in 2013 after being away from the Mountain West for 18 years. Around the time I moved here, I was working with a global team of researchers trying to find ways to compare mountain communities and their experiences around the world. Having the Wasatch Some are, but clearly some are not. I've always been fascinated by mountains, and I took the chance created by living here to study local attitudes about well-being tied to mountains, and it was a good way to get to know Utah's mountains and communities. My students and I interviewed 89 people representing key interest groups in 5 regions within the Wasatch Mountain area. We talked to emergency managers, planners, natural resource managers, and representatives of environmental and recreation and business and real estate interests. When we asked these people how the Wasatch Mountains influence well-being in this area, we found a strong tie between recreation and well-being. We found that other ways in which the Wasatch Mountains were said to influence well-being in the region included water, close proximity of the mountains and easy access, and other expressions of how the beauty, the wilderness, and the psychological benefits from living in and near the mountains influence quality of life and health, along with other benefits. A couple of quotes from people we interviewed show this focus on recreational well-being. Most people live here because of the mountains and the culture that we have and the outdoor lifestyle. They're also really key because of our state's recreation economy, a $12 billion economy. We also asked these folks if there were any threats or vulnerabilities tied to living in the Wasatch Mountains. Air quality and earthquakes and development pressures were the top 3 mentioned. Interestingly, 14% said there were no downsides at all in living in the Wasatch Mountains. Wildfires and flooding were also mentioned, along with a few other threats mentioned by fewer people. When we asked folks about the key sustainability issues for the Wasatch Mountain region, the need for smart development stood out for the majority of those interviewed. Water and air, both themes of our Research Landscapes events, were also noted. Recreation was mentioned too. And this sort of research can inform decision makers about what stakeholders value and are concerned about. For example, this might confirm that recreation, water, air, and development are key issues for stakeholders. It can also illuminate perspectives that might not be as well understood, like earthquake concerns. Utah's not alone in having recreation play an important role in the economy. New data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis shows Utah among the top states in the West for value added to state GDP by outdoor recreation. But recreation in Utah is complicated. One of our study participants said about the Wasatch Mountains, "I think they're being loved to death. We've got such a big population that loves going into these areas. From a professional standpoint, it's hard to keep accommodating the level of visitor use that we have." Check out this video showing how USU's Jordan Smith informs decision-making related to recreation.
I wanted to look at the impact that user fees might actually have. On visitation. We looked at Courtney canyons that are primarily free, and Mill Creek Canyon, which requires a day use of about $3 a day. We found low-income outdoor recreationists, those individuals who earn less than $25,000 a year, are traveling significantly farther, despite the fact that a closer, similar opportunity might be right nearby. I'm Jordan Smith. I direct the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism at the Community College of Natural Resources here at Utah State. So we have a variety of different tools that we use to measure and monitor visitor use. Right now we're starting to turn towards large publicly available data sets like social media. So every time you go out, you take a selfie or you take a picture of a beautiful landscape around the state, geographic coordinates of where that photo was taken or uploaded with the photo itself. And when we aggregate that data, we can actually capture entire visitation for an entire area. And what we're doing is trying to identify where those areas that currently aren't used, and how can we actually start to disperse use away from those high concentration areas that are starting to experience high levels of crowding. 40 to 45% of the entire population of the state lives in 4 counties. They live primarily right there on the Wasatch Front. So all this pressure for more outdoor recreation experiences is on the wildland-urban interface where people actually are.
And recreation isn't the only way that our relationship with landscapes and land use affect our well-being in sometimes surprising ways. I'm a sociologist, but I work with colleagues from other disciplines who study landscapes and how they change and affect well-being in different ways. And I'll highlight a few of those. If you live near a farm, you can feel the change of seasons in the farm activities around you, planting and harvesting. Agriculture is not just tied to the culture and history of Utah. It gives people a feel for the West, and that's important to them. In a 2014 survey we conducted in 23 urban neighborhoods in northern Utah, 10% grew up on a farm. And 28% of respondents farmed or had relatives who farmed at that time. Despite our highly urban population in Utah, Utahns are generally strong supporters of agriculture. Only about 27% of survey respondents said that they would be supportive of the idea of transferring water from agriculture to urban areas. The land-water relationship is definitely a big issue, given that 80% of Utah's water is used by the agricultural sector. But there are changes happening. In northern Utah, USU's Joanna Enterwada and her colleagues documented a 90% increase in urban areas from 1986 to 2015. And while the overall area of agricultural lands has also increased in this time frame as well, urban development is often taken over irrigated agricultural land, which has decreased in this area by 22%, and it's become more fragmented into smaller parcels. On the other hand, dry land farming, mostly wheat and safflower and dryland alfalfa, has expanded further away from urban areas. The total number of farms and farmers has increased over time, not decreased. Agriculture isn't diminished when you look at statewide figures, but it sure is changing in the urban interface. Agriculture and urban development are woven in the landscape along the Wasatch Front. But if you live here, you can see this is changing fast as farm fields become residential homes. The impacts on well-being are mixed. There's new housing for new generations of Utahns. But that way of life and the value of landscapes for longtime residents, not to mention the ecosystem benefits from farmland for habitat or flood control, these can take a hit. Land trusts and conservation districts are working hard across the state and hand in hand with USU researchers and extension folks to preserve ag land and work with developers on sustainable development. Mining is another important part of Utah land use. If you live near any of the oil or gas operations shown here, they're probably a key part of your landscape, and they probably play a big role in your local economy and your way of life. But while mining may provide a great boost to rural economies, there might be some potential negative aspects as well. We can see here in national data that Utah has some counties well above the state and national average for opioid overdose deaths. It's interesting to note that these rural counties also have employment rates in mining and natural resources that are well above Utah's employment rates in these areas. I am not saying that there's a direct correlation between mining and the opioid problem, but there's clearly a need for better understanding and outreach in these areas. New USU research by Seth Solzer and also by Jessica Schad will be looking into these relationships between rural natural resource dependent communities and the opioid crisis. Suicide rates have also been rapidly increasing in rural areas in the West. As you can see here in these maps at 5-year intervals from 2005 to 2015. Here's 2005. Here's 2010. Here's 2015. Here's 2005 again, and then 2015. These are tragic trends, and we need to better understand the relationship between land and land use and well-being in our rural counties. USU has faculty looking into this as well. fastest growing state since 2010 and third in 2018. This is due to both natural increase and incoming migration, as we all know. But not all parts of Utah are growing. The rural counties shown here in orange are declining in population. And you can see the impact of the loss of people in some small Utah towns and landscapes. Don Albright directs the Western Rural Development Center at USU. Much of his work is with small towns and rural counties across Utah and the western states. And he's helping communities prepare for a new world economy, as the jobs of the future are not really likely to look like the jobs of the past in these places. Some of these places are switching gears from resource extraction to recreation. They're using their great landscapes to entice people to visit and hopefully put down some roots and contribute to a broader, more diversified economy over time. But the toll of the new drives and vacation homes has really been felt by schools and local residents in places like Laverton on the road to Zion and in Moab near Arches. If you live near some of our state's fantastic natural areas and forests, you likely benefit from being able to visit and recreate in these amazing places. And that may certainly contribute to your overall well-being. But you may be dealing with growth in places that are not really designated for it or designed for it, or conflicts over public land uses or wildfire risk. Fire is a force to be reckoned with in Utah and throughout the Intermountain West. It's dramatically altering landscapes. And a number of us at USU work on fire issues in Utah and the West, tracking the increase in the amount of acres that are burning, the increased intensity of fires, and the impacts on communities and resource management. Patrick Belmont's research at USU shows the dramatic changes in landscapes that come not only from the effect of fire on vegetation, but on how fire and water interact and move rock and sediment. And when the land literally moves after fires, the shifting sediment can change habitat. It can threaten downstream communities and infrastructure, and it can reduce water storage capacity in reservoirs. Not a good thing when our changing climate is already altering our snowpack and our runoff timing. USU's Matthew Kim and Paul Jackson, who is here, studied the impacts of wildfire on national park visitation and regional economic activity. They found that the greatest visitation losses from fire were experienced by Bryce Canyon National Park. The total loss of industry output from decreased expenditures by visitors to the 5 Utah parks was between $2.7 and $4.5 million. And tourism-dependent rural counties really feel this hit. No matter where you live in Utah, you're likely close to public land, and that can affect your livelihood as well as the ways you spend your recreational time. As you know, Utah is second only to Nevada in having a high proportion of public land managed by federal agencies. Most of it exists as BLM land in Utah. And while these public lands are certainly a source of tension and conflict in Utah, few people dispute the importance they play in a recreational-based economy. We know from the 2019 State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan that 82% of recreation occurs within public lands. We also know from Rick Kranick's longtime USU research tracking attitudes about public lands that statewide, 82% of people surveyed agreed with statements that Utah public lands were an important part of their culture and their heritage and a key part of their life. But there are definitely competing interests in how public lands should be used. USU's Steve Daniels has played a key role in facilitating conflict management and dialogue among stakeholders on Monroe Mountain.
If we had spent all of our time competing against one another, we wouldn't have had enough bandwidth to be able to unify and solve the complexity of the underlying resource management. My name is Steve Daniels. I'm on the faculty at Utah State University as an extension specialist in community development, and I'm a professor in the sociology program. Think of Monroe Mountain as really a 200,000 acre rolling plateau. Ecologists say that the aspen trees have been disappearing, till now they are only about a third of the landscape that they occupied historically. Early on, the ranching community would say, well, the elk are doing all the browsing. Elk hunters would say, well, it's all the domestic livestock that's doing all of the browsing. We helped design and undertake rigorous research to map out the causes of herbivory, and that largely eliminated the blame game. By serving as important science and social intermediaries, we're able to host meetings and hold conversations with those local grazing permittees and achieve a level of trust and legitimacy that, quite frankly, the federal agencies couldn't have. What we ultimately did there was the result of careful research, careful monitoring, and really spending the time to work through the social and political complexity.
So then moving down out of the mountains and into the valleys, my work now focuses on taking the pulse of human well-being in Utah cities and towns. We're focusing down in the red zone on this map and elsewhere around the state. These are areas where this dominant land use change is urban growth and development. Along the Wasatch Front, population growth rates are really high. I mean, some places have growth rates from 30 to 70%, like in the Point of the Mountain area. And Vineyard just literally popped up in the last 10 years. It only had 139 people in 2010, but now it's over 14,000. Houses seem to march in quick step up the hillsides and out into the valleys, creating sharp juxtapositions between land uses. And the move of the state prison from the Point of the Mountain area to Alpine Airport will open up major new development in this area. Here's the map again of the places that we've been studying to date. This project on well-being in Utah is a 5-year project, and we're just starting year 2. And the goal is to provide information about community well-being to city leaders. In addition to conducting public surveys in 16 communities, we've begun meeting with mayors and city administrators to get their feedback on the findings. And we'll be expanding the study to new cities as we move along. And if your city is interested in having survey data collected, please get in touch with me and we'll talk about how to make that happen. We'll also share a report of our initial results shown today and more information by the holidays later this year. Our surveys indicate that there's quite a difference in how people perceive economic growth and perceive population growth and economic development. Looking specifically at responses from cities in the Point of the Mountain area, we can see that participants from Draper, Saratoga Springs, Lehigh, and South Jordan were more inclined to say that population growth is too fast. This looks pretty different in Price, where they've declined in population by 5.3% since 2010. Looking at the pace of economic development, participants from Draper, Lehigh, and South Jordan were largely split between too fast and just right. In Saratoga Springs, the majority felt growth was just right. But some folks also indicated they thought economic development was too fast and some too slow. Looking at Price, you can see a really different picture emerging. Many folks there were pretty clear in saying that there's just not enough economic development going on there. Cedar City's Mayor Wilson Edwards recently said, those in that too slow category, they just want Costco and an Olive Garden. I never realized before that land use controversies could so simply be resolved by an Olive Garden. As population growth and economic development often have footprints in the landscape, they're key land issues in Utah. What are we learning about well-being across Utah cities? Well, the city averages fell between 7 and 8 on a 10-point scale. When you look a bit more closely, you can see how cities differ. Interestingly, survey participants from the most rapidly growing cities had the highest overall well-being scores, along with Park City. They're also growing at about 11%, but not Price versus the others. And then communities with more diverse sociodemographics and more challenging socioeconomic situations scored a bit lower on overall personal well-being. We also measured a number of different domains of well-being, from physical health and living standards to social connections and leisure time and local environmental quality and beyond. And the average scores for the combined 16 cities are in the moderate to good range for all domains. This matrix helps city leaders see which domains are important to people and doing well, this upper right quadrant in green, and which domains are important to people but maybe not doing quite as well. That's the lower quadrant in red. And then this matrix looks different for each community. For some cities, local environmental quality and leisure time that are in the yellow zone actually move over into the red zone for specific places. These are both elements that can really have connections to land use. This type of information gives cities a baseline from which they can then measure changes over time. Our society is increasingly diverse here in Utah. We're tracking how well-being differs by age, gender, education, religion, income, and race and ethnicity, and some interesting patterns are emerging. Well-being levels, both overall and for a number of domains, were found to be higher for those who are older, wealthier, have college degrees, and attend the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In some cases, well-being levels were lower for non-whites and Hispanics, and for women across our Utah study locations. If you look at connection to nature, you can see that well-being is lower in this domain for non-whites or Hispanic respondents. In terms of local environmental quality, some people in our communities may be experiencing different conditions than others. We know this to be true in terms of our bench communities versus our valley floors in terms of air quality, for example. And as our demographics continue to change in our Utah cities, keeping track of the experience of different people in different groups is really important. And we'll continue to monitor these perceptions across Utah and over time. And that might help local and state leaders monitor the effect of land-related decisions on the well-being of their constituents. Lehigh City Administrator Jason Walker acknowledged the growing diversity in their city, as well as the land use challenges of growing population in general. He said, land use. The biggest fights we see now are you have the residents who are here and they want to protect that small town feel or that suburban feel. And you have some developers and prospective home buyers that want more affordable housing, denser housing, more vertical development. And there's that fight between the two groups, competing interests. It's interesting because you even have where existing homeowners, they might be on a quarter-acre lot, they'll protest lots of the same density. It's kind of that drawbridge effect. Now that we're in, we want to pull it in and not let anyone else in. That's our biggest struggle. This is a common refrain that we're hearing from different city leaders. When a change in land use is proposed, it affects people's sense of ownership and connection to place. New residential developments may block some people's views. Conversion of an old mall sparks debate about housing and how much to incorporate affordable housing. Cities are really where the rubber meets the road in terms of making local land use decisions and looking after the day-to-day service needs of their residents. But how cities approach these decisions differs quite a bit from one place to another, and conflicts are commonplace. Some of our most contentious land use issues are local, bringing out people with long-standing interests and different heartfelt perspectives on what future local landscapes should look like. These issues really hit at the heart of people's well-being and quality of life. The question we need to address is how to minimize or work through land conflicts and challenges to maximize well-being for as many people as possible. And USU's planning faculty, David Anderson and Jake Powell, work on these very issues, as you can see in this video.
Density tends to elicit fear in people.
Density tends to elicit fear in people.
Scares people.
It scares people.
Everybody wants their single family residence with
Yeah.
their
We just don't have the resources.
lot.
But the reality is, we just don't have the resources to support everybody on a quarter acre. I'm Jake Powell.
Both Jake and I have an assignment in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning in Utah State, where we work with USU Extension. Several years ago, we worked in the Ogden Valley, and we identified, for instance, a trail system that could be implemented completely around that valley and incorporate areas that have limited access. The county then took those ideas and hired professional consultants to further implement things on the books in their county. And so it wasn't just trails, but it's identifying places where we should have commercial development, where housing could go, ag lands we maybe should try and protect. I would say that these prime ag land fields grow great houses, but you can't protect them. And so we've gobbled up a lot of prime ag land and forced agriculture to the sort of marginalized perimeters.
Our job as designers and planners is figuring out ways to help people see examples of environmentally sensitive, low-impact development that gives people the quality of life outside of the building.
Do we really need giant quarter-mile long blocks? Now's maybe time to start thinking about breaking those down a little bit so that we provide all the necessary and needed amenities that people want in their communities, so they don't have to travel so far.
People are becoming more comfortable with density, and I think that's one reason why working with students is so enlightening. Maybe their idealized private residence isn't a quarter-acre anymore. They grew up there, but perhaps they're looking for more of a semi-urban or urban experience.
So I hope this presentation has given you some food for thought about how USU's research and engagement can contribute to better understanding and navigating these changes that we're experiencing in land use and their associated impacts on community well-being. And in addition to research and outreach, USU educates students who go back to Utah communities to work and to play and to relate to the land in different ways. These young Utahns, my students, are being trained to be able to engage and help balance and solve Utah's land issues and the changes and competing issues that they generate. It is really my greatest professional joy to work with these students and with the stakeholders around the state. And together, I think we can really work on sustaining the high quality of life we have here in Utah on into the future. And I thank you very much for being here.
Yes, thanks to Jenny, Cameron, and Courtney. Before I forget, Courtney mentioned, and of course obligated herself to provide us with that Utah Wellbeing Study before the holidays. I like that. I wish I had that with court deadlines sometime before the holidays. If you're not on the list, please make sure you're added to it at the check-in day before you leave today. We'll have an opportunity to send you the results of that study. We do have a few minutes for questions, so do we have questions for any of our commentators today? Jenny, Cameron, or Courtney, please. Yes?
I'm curious, Courtney, if you study perception of people in the communities vis-a-vis their legislators that make decisions about them.
So the question is whether we're studying the perceptions of people in communities and vis-a-vis their legislators that will represent them. And I'll say honestly, we haven't looked at that particular question, but we are beginning to reach out to the leaders in those communities and really understand their perspectives on the well-being in their communities, and then we can toggle that with our data. And I think that in time, once we have more data across the state, we can then scale that up and talk with our legislators and share with them some of the findings and see where we're going to have alignment or misalignment in the state. So I think that's something we can look forward to.
How did you pick the areas in which you conducted the studies?
Right, how did we pick the areas we started the surveys? We actually did a complex cluster analysis of communities all around the state, and it found different types of bundles of communities, and we chose really the ones where we could cluster and we could get people commit to letting us use the public library or a Walmart or a Harmon's to let us gather surveys with these iPads and out in the public. And then we worked to make sure we were getting some diversity. But this is only just a beginning. So it was just our 16 cities from this first. We just did this in May and June, and then we'll be adding adding more cities. So there is a method to our madness, but right now there are some serious gaps that we need to fill in as the project develops.
Yeah, I have a question for Cameron. The information that Courtney is being provided, how are you going to roll this out to universities and towns and be integrated into the planning process?
Thank you for the question. For those who have not heard the question is how are we, as the League of Cities and Towns, from the 248 municipalities around the state, going to take this information and incorporate it into the planning process at a local level? Courtney and I sat down a few weeks ago to start having that very conversation. As you heard her mention, this is year 2 of the 5-year process. So we're still laying the groundwork for how we take the information and implement it. There are a handful of key takeaways that already can be implemented beyond just those 16 cities. I think it's fascinating to see the value that Utahns feel about the mountains and about the natural world around them. So I think that information is very helpful, whether you're Draper or West Jordan, or there are a handful of other city leaders in the room right now. You can go back and say, okay, how do we incorporate that as we're planning for this job center or planning for this transportation infrastructure? And maybe as we're negotiating with UDOT, let's make sure that there's a trail nearby that then provides that access to the outdoors. The Department of Transportation, under former President Diehl's leadership, is starting to really examine the Concord Canyons. The cities there are already working collaboratively with UDOT to look at the canyons did on the mountain area. So a lot of the challenges that they're highlighting are well known. What Utah State is going to be able to do is plug in that data to help make informed decisions. We think we're just in year 2. Courtney, do you want to answer that question as well?
I think it's exciting to have these opportunities with the league, but also with all the counties around the state. USU's got these great connections. You know, I take our land grant mission very, very seriously, and so we work hard to make sure that we are out and having these conversations and working to develop partnerships and listen and see where those connections, not just with the scientific knowledge, but with the local and the professional knowledge that's out there that together we can put together to really address some of these critical issues. So I welcome this partnership, and it'll be a lot of fun to get out and meet more of you and keep building this project.
Are you aware of research or have you done research about transportation? Front runner, light rail, busing, age demographics, geography, east, west, north, south. Is that something that's out there?
So the question is about transportation. What research is out there on transportation and the corridors and really all of the different ways people are getting around and what we can do in the future. I don't personally do this, but our folks in landscape architecture and planning up at USU are definitely working on transportation issues. I had a student in my survey research class last year who was doing a survey on the front runners, getting out there to talk to people and why they're using it, how they're using it, and getting out to those who aren't using it and finding out why and what they need. So we definitely have, faculty and students that are out there collecting these data and working with, I think, some of the leaders across the state on these issues. So we're there and we can certainly do more as well.
My question is for Mayor Wilson. Kenny, I'm really impressed with the passion with which you speak about the canyons and endorsing it. I appreciate your focus on that. My question is this. How do you interpret what we've learned about the use of these?
So I'm going to say a decade or even maybe 15, 16 years ago, Salt Lake County imposed a fee in cooperation with Forest Service on Mill Creek Canyon use. So any people who go up there are used to paying on their way down $3, and that is pooled and it helps the county with the Forest Service address some of our key needs in the canyon. It's not a big income generator, but it does help. And I think that we are at the point in time where user fees are to be considered for the Wasatch Canyon. It's a little more complicated. We're dealing with the Forest Service with such a broad policy change. We had allowance from the legislature last year to consider tolling, and I think tolling can work for transportation in the future. The implementation is still a question. To make the technology available, we have to make sure that there are other options. Perhaps if we were able to in some way move a mass transit system, we would want to toll, I think, for those who choose not to use the mass transit system, but to actually take their car. So I think the idea of user fees and the canyons is very much on the table, and something that I think all of the partners who are looking at canyon solutions are embracing. I mean, I always point out that, and I don't have a statistic off the top of my head, but I share that each of us has a recreation story, but they're not all in the canyons in this valley. Trying to scoop this out or something. But in any event, I think that our recreation story might be elsewhere, and the idea, I think, it is fair to ask users to participate in canyon solutions. I also feel that we don't want to price out, kids from Magna and the elderly like young kids. So we have to be really careful to oppose that user fee in the right way. And I think the user fee on transportation in some form where we can implement it is a great step towards transportation solutions. And with the growth in demand in the canyons, we may have to find a way to oppose these in some way, but those are going to be complex arrangements. And of course, the federal government or service will have to be at the table.
Just a couple minutes. All right, well, now we'll wrap up. We do appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today. I hope that you'll gain a greater appreciation for the role that Utah State University plays in addressing these critical problems in our state. Before you leave, please take some time to review other active USU research projects and how they might better inform your discussions, decisions, and investments. We look forward to your continued participation as we continue this series. I think people out there are very not able to speak on as we continue additional discussions in our series, we'll be having a new event in January. We'll be publishing our 2020 list of speakers before Thanksgiving. We appreciate you sharing those opportunities with your colleagues and organizations. In the meantime, we also want to make you aware of another event series we sponsor, Sunrise Sessions, and invite you to participate. We have a flyer in your packet on that. Our next event will be Tuesday, November 5. And it will be about land, but this time geology. Geosciences researcher Alexis Hall will discuss her earthquake research and how she involves K through 12 students and gather insights about unlocking Utah's geologic past. In the folder, we've also included a very brief survey that we appreciate you filling out. We want these events to be as useful and informative for you as we can, so we appreciate your feedback on what content or format we can provide will be most useful to you. Once again, thank you for making these events successful, and we look forward to your continued participation in 2020. I also once again want to thank Dave Peterson and OC Canada for making this beautiful space available to us. As you leave, please stop by the check-in table, and we'd like to recycle your name tag and